What's up, guys? I'm Greg Alba. This is
John Humphrey over here.
Welcome to the Real Rejects, where today we're going to watch a long video about our favorite new cinematic universe, the Dark Universe. So excited. Definitely think it's going to work. No concerns.
Let's do it. IGN, 13 facts about Dark Universe.
Awesome.
This might get us excited.
Maybe.
The Dark Universe has been born. That's the name for Universal's cinematic universe based on its classic monsters from the 30s. First up is The Mummy. Writer-director Alex Kurtzman is one of the key architects of the Dark Universe. We spoke to him at length to find out more about the project and the rules governing its creation.
It's alive! It's alive!
Kurtzman is a lifelong devoted fan of Universal's classic monsters, and while these new movies will be indebted to the horror tradition, he sees them as a genre in their own right.
I think for me, the thing that defines the Universal monsters as its own genre, you know, separate from really even the Hammer monsters and horror film and slasher films, is that you fear the monster and you fear for the monster. And those original monster films were character films, and they were played by movie stars who imbued those monsters with a heartbreak and an agony and a pathos and an emotion that I think is so specific to the Universal monsters. I think that there was a particular scene for me as a kid that struck me from Frankenstein, and it's the scene with Frankenstein at the water with the girl. What struck me about that scene is that he so desperately wanted to connect to a human being and to be appreciated and to be loved, and in his desire to connect didn't realize he was destroying the very thing that he wanted to connect with, and that to me symbolizes what the monsters are about.
Yeah.
No, you're hurting me! No!
You ask a 4-year-old kid to draw Frankenstein, and they're going to draw green skin and flat top head and bolts in the neck, and that's the Universal monsters Frankenstein. And so for almost 100 years, these monsters have endured, I think, because they represent something so human.
And they won't be messing with the classic designs. It sounds like we'll be seeing Javier Bardem with Jack Pierce's design for Frankenstein's monster.
When we started this, we have some amazing artists working on monster designs, and we started putting together look boards for the monsters, which, as an adult, to be able to do that for your job is pretty much the best thing in the world. We started, you know, kind of taking different designs and playing around with them and saying, well, what if we remove this, and what if we add that? And it became incredibly clear, almost instantaneously, that we must not touch these monsters. If you start messing those things up, you are actually fundamentally betraying what everybody loves about them. If we're going to make adjustments, they have to be story-based adjustments. You know, there has to be something about the story that mandates that we make the adjustment. But, you know, to do The Bride of Frankenstein and not have the streaks in the hair from the electricity, or to do Frankenstein without the bolts in the neck, and, you know, would be a fundamental betrayal. And so I think the key is figuring out how to really protect and preserve and not change what is not broken, you know?
While the idea of a shared universe brings to mind comic book movies, Kurtzman was keen to point out that the monsters got there first.
I tend to feel like the best way to build a universe is to deliver individual, satisfying films, and if the audiences like those films, the universe will begin to build itself. Obviously, Marvel did an amazing job starting with Iron Man, but people forget that the monsters were the first shared universe, starting with Frankenstein meets Wolfman. And the reason that worked was because they had already done 3 Frankenstein films, and they'd already done Wolfman films, and the audience loved both characters, and they kind of ran out of gas with those stories. They said, well, what are we going to do? What if we put them together? And suddenly a new story was born, and it was actually really exciting to see, and that birthed a million monster crossovers. So the monsters were the first shared universe.
The marketing seems to
In
contradict.
Kurtzman's Mummy, Russell Crowe
Yeah,
plays Dr. Henry
like he's
Jekyll,
talking a
functioning
great
a little
game
bit
right
like
now.
the Dark Universe's Nick Fury. He oversees the secret organization Prodigium, but Jekyll was never a core character in the original monster movies. Kurtzman eventually included Jekyll for very specific reasons.
I tend not to respond to worlds where a lot of characters are thrown at me before I have individual relationships with them. So the idea of bringing Dr. Jekyll into The Mummy was a real debate, because you don't intuitively think that Henry Jekyll is going to be in The Mummy. Yeah. So in our conception of the film, the idea that Tom's character Nick inadvertently opens Pandora's box and comes to understand that the mummy exists in a continuum of gods and monsters, and that, you know, the mummy may be the oldest, but there are many more, and that there's an organization that has been tracking them and protecting them and hunting them and doing different, you know, depending on the monster. It became clear that someone was going to have to introduce Tom's character to that world. And then you start to say, okay, well, it's got to be somebody who has his own relationship to evil. If I'm describing Tom's character And I say this is about a man who, you know, has good and evil in him. He has to decide which side of the line he's going to be on. He has a monster potentially lurking inside of him waiting to explode outward. Well, I could also be describing Henry Jekyll. And so the idea that Henry is in the movie because Henry has been where Nick is going and acts as a mirror to Nick's character suddenly allowed us a real story reason to put him in the film.
Welcome to Prodigium.
While they might be keeping tabs on these monsters, it's not exactly clear whether Prodigium are the good guys, and that's sort of the point.
I think that what's interesting about the organization is you've got an organization that is, you know, as I said, either protecting, researching, or hunting monsters run by a man who could be good or evil. You know, so it's a somewhat unpredictable thing, even though Prodigium's agenda is ultimately to protect the world from this whole existence of monsters. There's a kind of gray area that I think is interesting, and it stays true to what I think the monster films are about. I just don't think anything is ever black and white in a Universal Monsters universe. While their intentions are good, I think sometimes you have to do really bad and scary things to serve a greater good, and maybe Prodigium will be in that position.
It takes a monster to defeat a monster.
The overarching threat is also less than clear right now. It's definitely not as simple as them fighting the monsters. We asked Kurtzman if there was indeed a big bad.
That's a very spoiler-rich question you're asking me. I can say this. The threat could come from within Prodigium. There might be other forces out there or other organizations that want to do the opposite of what Prodigium wants to do. And maybe those organizations were built by other monsters. Maybe the monsters don't all have the same agendas. Maybe they want very different things. Maybe some want to bring the evil into the world, while others want to protect the world from it. So I think, you know, if you look back at the original monster films, all the monsters actually did want different things, you know, and that's the juice. That's where you get your conflict.
Despite a lot of the original films taking place predominantly in London and a mythic version of Europe, the Dark Universe will be a globe-trotting franchise.
These are global films, so it's going to be dependent on the nature of each monster. You know,
China!
Some of the monsters, Creature from the Black Lagoon is the Amazon. You know, so it's all about figuring out what is the nature and the mythology of each monster and figuring out a setting, but our whole design is to make these global films.
Even though there's more movies and characters to set up, there isn't a teaser for the next installment of the Dark Universe at the end of The Mummy, and don't expect any in the future either.
No, that's Marvel's domain. Maybe it'll feel more appropriate down the line as the universe builds itself, but I don't think any of us wanted to be accused of ripping off what they did so well.
It's about damn time.
Kurtzman says he wants to attract the best actors to play the monsters, and he thinks it's a more attractive proposition than any superhero role.
If you ask any of the actors that we've now got into the universe, Johnny Depp, Javier, Russell, Tom, they will all tell you a similar story about watching the Universal monsters as kids and being terrified, and how much they loved them. Look at it from their point of view, okay? You can play a superhero.
Sophia
Pretty
doesn't care.
square-jawed superhero. Flaws that are interesting but often not wildly deep. Or you can play a character in which the assumption is that the character will be broken, damaged, violent, upset, scary, and there's no expectation that the character will be fixed by the end, because if they were fixed, they wouldn't be monsters anymore. It's a very, very enticing idea for an actor. You know, if you're making movies at the studio level, at the scope and scale, how often do you get the chance to make a movie about complicated gray areas?
Johnny Depp has been announced as the Invisible Man, but there's no standalone film on the cards for him yet. So we asked if he'll debut in Bride of Frankenstein.
You'd have to see. Just pay a ticket to see.
Well, that's probably a yes then. Bill Condon will direct Bride of Frankenstein. He's the man behind 1998's Gods and Monsters, a biopic of James Whale, the director of Universal's original Frankenstein. And as Kurtzman is currently scouting potential directors, we asked what he's looking for.
Obviously, fandom is a huge part of it, you know. So let's take Bill Condon, who's directing Bride of Frankenstein. You're talking about a director who understands the nature of what it means to make a monster movie at the DNA level, but also what those monsters represented to that director, James Whale. His connection and affinity for Bride, and the way he represented her, and the way he represented Frankenstein in Gods and Monsters, told all of us there wasn't even a debate, you know, about who should be directing this movie, because you're talking about someone who just in their DNA understands it. I think that it's all about figuring out who speaks to the spirit of these films, who understands them the most, and which writers come up with takes that are, and we work with the writers to do that, that are honoring the tradition and the heritage while bringing something new to the table. And it's hard, you know, I mean, we don't want to make these movies until they're worth making, until they're right.
And while we're on the subject of gods and monsters, it's a line uttered by Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
It crops up in The Mummy, and Kurtzman's said it with us a few times. There's something about the phrase that seems to carry more significance for this fledgling universe.
It depends on how you interpret a god. I mean, you know, the Egyptians interpreted a god, but as Henry says, evil has many names. Take Set, for example, known to Egyptians as a god of chaos, whereas other cultures call it this or that. Really, we're all talking about the devil. I think the idea would be that every culture has a way of translating a mythology, and sometimes we call them gods and sometimes we call them monsters, and I think as the universe expands, we will begin to understand what that really means.
I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you.
And even though The Mummy isn't a full-blown horror movie, Kurtzman wants the Dark Universe to push the scares as much as possible.
The movies that I loved growing up were the movies that walked right up to the line of R, you know, and where you feel like they hold you in that state of suspense and terror, but they don't always cross it. Obviously, the most notable example being, you know, seeing Raiders as a kid, and it's just, that's a really scary movie, you know, and as the guy's face melts at the end, you're like, what? You know, at 8 years old, that's shocking, but it's so appropriate to the story.
Hope they include that.
Oh yeah.
What I appreciate is Alex Kurtzman. He seems to have a really in-depth and articulate way of expressing, you know, his understanding of what makes the Dark Universe, the original Dark Universe of the Universal monsters, work so well.
Is he the shepherd of this new thing, like beyond just the Mummy? Okay.
Honestly, like if I had seen this first, I might have had more hope.
I really liked what he had to say.
Yeah.
It's so weird. I think he's got the right idea, and he seems to understand, you know, and he seems to care about these characters and these films. The advertising just doesn't give me
the advertising doesn't seem to replicate at all, or
at all.
You know, shine a light in the same way of how he's talking about it here.
Yeah.
You know, I know some people who saw The Mummy already.
Really?
And they were like, it's more of an action comedy. Yeah.
What?
Yeah,
no.
I know some people who said that. I mean, that's just a few people. I can't take their word for it. But the clips that I did see seem to have, like, action comedy elements to it. You know, he's saying stuff like he doesn't, you know, they want to honor the original designs. And then I see Sofia Boutella in The Mummy. And I'm like, that ain't The Mummy. That's the last thing from The Mummy.
Yeah.
You mean like a few bandages equates to honoring the design? Like, that's not the same thing.
She's like sprouting 4 eyes, and she's doing all sorts of
It's a totally different Mummy.
I like her. Like I am open to seeing what they do with it. But yeah, I was like, that looks like a different Mummy.
Yeah.
It's not like the same Mummy.
And he's talking about how universes, what makes them good is when you make good just solo individual films and you're not pushing universe building when the marketing seems to contradict that completely.
Yeah,
the marketing seems to be all about the universe building and about the potential when they all cross over.
Lately, yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Because that's what I find myself wishing is I am concerned for them because they're like, okay, we're doing this Mummy movie, and you know, rumors started to spread, and just the word on the street was, they're going to do a bunch of these. We're going to revitalize them, and then they came out gung ho like a couple weeks ago. Like, this is the universe. Here are our plans.
Yeah.
You look back to Iron Man. I don't remember what all of the announcements and plans were at that time, but I got the sense that Iron Man was Iron Man, and then that was successful, and then we really ramped up on like, okay, this is gonna work. And I feel like I'm a little worried they're putting the cart before the horse with this and being like, check out our universe before we even know if the first one's successful.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, I've seen and heard plans get canceled and changed around so much. I'm like, this is a gamble, and it's not tracking as comfortably as they would like to.
And in terms of, you know, Alex Kurtzman's one of the writers who's worked on a lot of things that involve twists and mysteries.
Transformers and Star Trek.
Yeah, those. Tom Cruise is featured on like the Dark Universe, like the picture they show here, Javier Bardem, Johnny Depp, Sofia Boutella.
Yeah, Frankenstein,
no
the
one
Invisible
seems
Man,
to,
the Mummy, Nick.
Yeah, no one seems to acknowledge who Sofia Boutella is, and I don't know why, because it's like they're talking about the monsters.
Villain.
They're talking about the monsters. The trailer is showing Sofia Boutella's the Mummy. And no one's even acknowledging Sophia Patell's the Mummy.
You're
they're talking about this Nick guy that Tom Cruise is playing.
She's the title character,
so
and you are leading with her.
Yeah, it kind of gets me curious as to, you know, like the way he was talking about who this Nick character is, it got me more intrigued. I'm hoping that by the time I see the movie that I'm like, oh, he is in his own way some type of monster in some fashion. Like maybe there's some twist he has up his sleeve of who Tom Cruise really is, that he's not just this Navy SEAL Nick dude, that he's something much more. And the trailers seem to semi-hint at that. You know, and then
it must be super in some way if he wakes up in a body bag, like, or there's just a bad coroner.
Oh yeah, he should be dead. He doesn't look injured at all when he wakes up in that body bag, and he's talking about how Dr. Jekyll was in the position that Tom Cruise's character is at. And I appreciated what he said of why he included Dr. Jekyll.
Again, it's like you said, if you just showed me this, I would actually be really, really intrigued. And that, I don't know, the whole Tom Cruise thing, hearing that almost, I don't know how to feel about that idea of like, Tom Cruise is something more, because now I'm a little worried this is going to become like, Tom Cruise is basically a superhero, and these will be basically like super villains.
Yeah.
And here we go.
And he's talking about like getting the best actors in, but the big rumor, it's just a rumor, but the big rumor seems to be for the Wolfman to be Dwayne Johnson, and I'm like, that's not the same caliber of actors that you're talking about here, you know?
Yeah, that's, I mean,
as
that's
much as
a beloved actor perhaps right now, but yeah, I haven't seen him turn in the kind of performances the rest of them have.
Yeah, it just seems like a lot of the marketing seems to be contradicting what he's saying here.
Yeah,
and
so
oftentimes, you know, it's like Alex Kurtzman might be the one, you know, like being the shepherd for this. However, he's not the one in charge of all the shots. He's not. He might be the one who's the creative guide, but Universal, at the end of the day, they will push their agenda, you know?
Yeah, and this feels, yeah, it's just, it feels contradictory. If this dropped the week the movie's supposed to come out, it feels like an attempt to save face or something,
yeah.
or to be like, no, people who actually care about the original movies, we care about them too. See, now, like, the more stuff I've seen from this and the more things I've heard, the less I understand what is truly going to happen with all this. The more, like, I'm weirdly intrigued, because in the back of my mind, like, I want it to work, and especially having heard him talk, like, I like pretty much everything he had to say.
Yeah. It's weird because he seems to have a very deep understanding of what the Universal monsters are.
Yeah.
Yet they're changing the genre, and they practically admitted to that. Like, the Mummy's not really horror; it's like has elements, and they said something like that here.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Where it's, you know, it's action adventure with some horror elements, and they're saying down the road they want to push the envelope a little more. But why not just start off with more?
Well, yeah.
Horror,
It's like, why don't you start off by being distinct instead of? And again, we haven't seen it, but like every time I see those scenes in the trailer that look like they're from the third act of the movie, I'm like, I've seen this third act a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
The Mummy movies from the 90s and the early 2000s are action adventures with, you know, a hefty amount of horror wallpaper.
Yeah.
Like, it's not hard to put horror wallpaper in. And I feel like these movies should have some horror intrinsically in their DNA instead of just dressing up in horror costumes.
We should watch it this weekend.
We probably should, because
we should watch it
because we've talked so much about it, and there's so much
skepticism
to do. Yeah, and I don't know, for me, I feel like it's my duty to go and at least take a look.
I don't think we've ever even been accused in like a hater comment of having preconceived notions and then leading our opinion of the movie off preconceived notions. I credit us as being good at taking the product for what it is.
Hey, if this movie wins me over, cool.
Yeah.
Like, like, really what I want is for that to happen.
Yeah.
Like, especially here.
Yeah, if anything, that I'm hoping that I go, you know what? It's way better than I anticipated.
Yeah, and seeing this video, I'm like, okay, if you are the shepherd, that makes me happy. I like your ideas, and so if those wind up on screen...
But oftentimes intention doesn't equate to execution.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah... I don't know. Yeah, I definitely want to like this.
I feel like I said that well.
You did.
Intention does not... I forgot what I said.
It's okay. It was light. You'll never see the footage
I was
again.
like, you're usually the one who sounds super smart. I'm like, I think I said that really well.
Hey,
now.
you are an articulate cat too, my friend. You are a sharp cookie. Yeah, Dwayne Johnson. Who's gonna play the game?
Yeah, and I'm like, I mean, that's just a rumor. He hasn't been cast yet officially. If that is true, I'm like, that contradicts a lot of what's being said here too, because Dwayne Johnson is, granted, superstar, wonderful performer, and
I would
highly entertaining. But he's not on the caliber of these great actors that you're talking about.
No.
He's not. He's not.
The only way that would work for me, like, just conceptually anyway, is, like, if we had one of those arguments where it's like, that's weird casting, and then he turns up and he gives us something that we haven't seen him do before. And again, I would be very open to that. I like Dwayne Johnson, and if he wanted to actually throw down on acting, like, you know, the acting chops of it and get into the horror side of it, like, that I would be pleased by that. I feel like the most important element of this is the spiritual element, because there's so much history and stuff to draw from, and this communicates to me that the spirit is intact. Everything I've seen out of the actual movie doesn't do that. No. It makes me worried for the spirit.
It more looks like a thrill ride.
Yeah, it
when
looks
he's
like
talking about it. What makes the OG monsters work is that they're character driven.
Yeah.
When I'm like, man, everything you're showing me though from just the Mummy alone does not seem like. And I know this is trailers, so we can't judge it off of that alone.
Yeah, and maybe they want to pitch it like that, but it's not.
So that way they can
like
sell tickets. Yeah, that could be the case.
Advertising's weird.
However, it's like, you know, you got three trailers that all have a very similar feel, and I'd be very surprised if it's not at all in tone with how any of the trailers are. But if that's the case, if I walk out going, you know what, Alex Kurtzman, he did exactly what he was setting out to do, and he succeeded, I'd be like, fuck yeah.
Good on you.
I'll be very happy. And
I want to believe you.
And something, you know, if I were to make a prediction on how I'm going to feel by the end of watching The Mummy, I feel like I'm going to walk out going, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, but it's still not great. That's where I think I'm going to land. I feel like I'm going to walk out going, you know, it doesn't exactly live up to everything Alex Kurtzman's saying in this video that we saw. However, it's not like the level of disappointment that, you know, like the trailers have been making me feel like I'll probably land.
And we can work from here. It's like, if there's one thing that I do feel reassured by now that we've had,
especially with the DC,
so many DC movies do this, is people listen to feedback.
Yeah, people listen to feedback. Yeah.
You can change things.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want to, and then, you know, things can get better. And if you're gonna do a universe, hey, cool, awesome.
And last note, we said in a video last week that we might be doing a retro review series of The Mummy, and we were going to, but then we realized, you know, if we do that, it'll be much harder to just accept what this Mummy is. It's such its own thing that if we go in with like the feeling and the love that we already know we have for the other Mummy films, and then we go in just trying to adjust and accept this new thing, that's when preconceived notions can really play a factor in your viewing experience.
Yeah.
And we don't want that to happen. When we go watch this movie, we want to make sure that we're able to just go in. We know we love, if you want a short review, short retro review, we love The Mummy, the OG one, and we love the Brendan Fraser, the first two ones. Don't like the third one. That's it for you.
Yeah, I mean, I might be tempted to go back and watch like the old Mummy, like the
because that's what they're talking about.
Yeah,
they're talking about the Boris Karloff. Like that's the era they're honoring is that time.
See, I wouldn't want to watch the Brendan Fraser one because this looks a little too close to that, and like the original, the old Mummy is not a swashbuckler anyway.
No, not at all.
And so I might be interested to go back and rewatch that. Maybe if this train continues and the next ones come out, maybe we will go back and do like the old Frankenstein, the old Wolfman, the old creature from the Black Lagoon.
I just think right now we just gotta see what it is for what, because when you go to watch a movie with the original in mind so strong, it can affect your viewing experience of what they're trying to do as its own thing.
Well, actually, like most of the time, I like the way this is a kind of a peer behind the curtain. I kind of like the way we do it a lot of times with these movies that have a lot of material preceding them. I know you like to go back and rewatch them all, and I usually prefer to go in cold.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like we have both of the corners covered there. But this one, since there's so much around it, I feel like cold is kind of the best way to go.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning into the channel.
We are no more sure of this than we were.
Yeah, if anything, it's more like, now I'm just a little more confused. You can subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell to be notified every time one of our videos is up. John is @JohnHumphrey on Twitter and Instagram. Social media manager at Blumhouse.com. And you could go check out our Patreon for all the exclusive perks on there, the rewards, the exclusive video content that we have there.
Hugs.
Go check it out. Have a great time, guys, and keep a lookout for our review of The Mummy. That'll be out some point this weekend. I don't know if I don't think we're gonna go Thursday night. I don't care that much.
I'm not gonna lose sleep.
Yeah.
Over
By
this.
Sunday, it'll be out.